Welcome to Ask Away with AccessAble Ambassadors, the series where you ask your burning questions about disability and accessibility, and we, disabled people, answer them. I'm Carrie-Anne Lightly. I'm the chair of the AccessAble Ambassador Network, and I have cerebral palsy, which means that I use a wheelchair. I'm joined today by our lovely ambassador, Pippa. Pippa, please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you for having me. To briefly introduce myself, I'm Pippa. I'm a disabled writer, speaker, content creator, and I also work as a communication consultant in the charity sector. I have a chronic illness called ME and a few other bonus bits and bobs as well. So I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user and I love having a natter about all things disability and inclusion.
Which is perfect, because that's what we're here to talk about today. So we've had some excellent questions in from followers, etc. And we'd love to get your answers. So Pippa, I'm going to go straight into questions without any further delay. And the first question that we've got to put to you is, what do you wish that people understood about your access needs?
Oh, I think something I wish people understood about my access needs is because I have a dynamic disability, my access needs change day by day, sometimes even hour by hour sometimes. So how I'm feeling on a particular day or the situation that I'm in, that dictates what my access needs are, and that is something that changes over time. So for example, when I'm out of the house, I'm usually using a wheelchair, and in that case, my access needs are of course things like accessible spaces, ramped or level access, accessible toilets. Whereas there might be some occasions where I'm not using a wheelchair, and because I can only stand and walk for short periods of time, my access needs then become things like making sure there's always seating available, knowing the exact distances between different things, perhaps knowing whether there's a quiet space available, whether I'm going to an attraction or a venue where I can have a companion. So it really does change, and it's not a static thing. So I think having a dynamic disability means that my access needs end up being dynamic as well.
I completely agree with that. And though we come at this from very different angles of lived experience, our conditions affect us very differently. I really resonate with that idea that it changes depending on the day. And one of the things that I often say is, mobility aids are like pairs of shoes. You wouldn't just have one pair of shoes to try and do absolutely everything in your life with. And I think that's similar with mobility aids. And I'm fortunate enough to have a couple of different types of wheelchairs. So I have a manual chair and a power chair, and I also have a power add-on for the manual chair. And I'll use different versions, different combinations, whatever, depending on where I'm going and what I'm doing and what the environment is, but also depending on how I feel on the day. And I think it's just really important to get that across, that it's quite difficult to capture all of those needs in a single little tick box when you're perhaps communicating to venues or to other people what your needs are so you can be accommodated. The most important thing is that you have the information that you need so that you can make that decision on the day as to which mobility aid you use, etc.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing is that it's often quite a trial and error thing as well. So if somebody's new to disability, they might be thinking, oh gosh, I've got to have it all figured out. I need to know exactly what my access needs are before I do anything ever. But the thing is, like, you've got to be open to the fact that you'll learn as you go along and things change. But I think what stays the same is that it's always good to be prepared. So the more information you have about the place you're going to, the better it is.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And our next question, Pippa, is how do you explain a dynamic disability to people or help them to understand?
It can be really tricky to explain a dynamic disability to somebody. It's definitely something I've not got down into a neat little definition yet, but I have around 15 years of lived experience now. And the thing I always try to communicate to people is that I have good days and I have bad days. Sometimes there are things that I can do within my control that will help to dictate having a good day, but sometimes it's just completely out of my control. But the thing with that is that I think people tend to only see me on the good days. Like whenever I'm out and about or whenever I'm doing something like this, you're usually seeing me and forming an impression of me based on the good days. Whereas when the bad days come, that's usually something that nobody else sees except me. So I think when it comes to dynamic disabilities, it's really important to pay attention to what the person is saying and to do your best to believe and understand the lived experience that they're sharing, because we often make judgments based on only what we can see with our own eyes, but often that doesn't even tell half of the story when it comes to dynamic disabilities.
Completely. It's about trust, isn't it? And it's about trusting the individual as the expert in their needs, their condition, their body, their triggers, their fluctuations. And yeah, as you say, just because you can't see something doesn't mean it isn't real. And I really resonate with that, that you are naturally more visible on the good days, so that is what people see more of. And that's something that I kind of fight with a little bit in terms of my content. We both create content on social media, and a lot of my content is by its nature showing me out and about in the world on the very good days. And the nature of the bad days means that it's not just that I'm sort of protecting sharing that, but it's actually more difficult to share it because I don't have the energy. I'm not in the right headspace. I don't feel safe enough to capture myself in that moment and share it with a public audience. And I know that these are some things that you'll have dealt with as well. And I think I just wanted to share that with people. I just wanted to say, if you see people who are active and have a profile online, like Pippa, like me, like some of our other ambassadors, just keep that in mind, that a lot of the time you are only seeing the good days. We try where we can to share some of the bad day elements to try and achieve balance in our content, but it's important to just remember that.
Yeah, for sure. Like always keeping that balance in mind is really important. And like you say, it really does take a lot more vulnerability than you might expect to put that out there, especially when you do have an audience. Often, no matter what your disability is and what your lived experience is, you're always having to deal with things like unsolicited advice, hostility, stigma. So, yeah, all the people that you follow online and the people whose content you enjoy, it's always important to take it with a pinch of salt, because comparison, it never helps anybody really. So it's important to like take inspiration, take whatever you need from other people. Like if their content makes you feel good, then that's great, but always take it with a pinch of salt, because comparison helps nobody.
Completely agree. That's so wise. Pippa.
I try.
Um, and then my last question is, what do you wish you'd known earlier?
Oh my gosh, something I wish I'd known earlier is that using a wheelchair would make my world bigger rather than smaller. Like when I was early on in my journey and I didn't really understand much about disability or the social model of disability, it seemed like using a wheelchair was the absolute end of the world. And I wish I could go back and tell myself that using a wheelchair would actually make my world so much bigger, because for me, it means that I can get out far more often and I can do so much more than I would otherwise be able to do. Like in the early days, I was barely leaving the house and I was often getting the FOMO. And don't get me wrong, there are still days when, even with a wheelchair, I can't get out of the house. But using a mobility aid means I can do so much more of the stuff that I want to do. And I end up with much less payback as a result as well. I end up with much less poorliness, and it doesn't take me as long to recover from either. So I always say that, believe it or not, using a wheelchair has honestly changed my life for the better, and I really wish that's something that I'd understood sooner.
I again agree with everything that you said there, and I think um, it's an interesting piece around wheelchair use, because I do think that you have to live it and experience it to understand how freeing and liberating not only using a wheelchair, but using the right wheelchair can be. I say this as someone who has had many different types of wheelchair over the years, a lot of trial and error, sometimes some very expensive kind of mistakes where I've ended up with a chair that actually doesn't fit my life very well at all. But we hear this language, wheelchair bound, suffers from, etc. And that feels quite restricting. And my wheelchair doesn't restrict my life. My wheelchair expands my life and means that I am able to access places that I wouldn't be able to access because, again, I wouldn't have the energy or the pain tolerance to
Mhm.
mobilize in the outside world in any other way.
Yeah.
It's
And
about
in the
freedom.
same, it is in the same breath, I'm just thinking, of course, we both know all too well that there are obviously access barriers, there's ableism, like the world needs to become a more accessible place. So although there are challenges you face in a practical sense sometimes, like again, having access to the right info and the support, ultimately it does still make your world bigger. And I completely agree with you. Like the sense of freedom it gave me at a time when I thought that that was something that was long behind me. Like you can't put a price on that. That's such a game-changing experience.
I agree, and I think there's something about the first time you do something new as a wheelchair user, the first time you successfully tackle a new route locally, or like I'm remembering the first time I was able to access a beach as a wheelchair user using a beach wheelchair, or the first time I walked my dog independently without anybody else with us, and it was just totally on a whim. It was just totally, do you know what? I'm going to grab the lead and just give it a go. And now that is an essential part of my daily routine. It's very freeing. And you're right, there are barriers. We cannot gloss over that and we cannot forget that. But part of me wants to say that the barriers are going to be there, whether you use the tool that makes it more accessible for you or not, whether you use the tool that makes it easier for you or not, the barriers are going to exist. And it is about being informed and knowing your rights and, having a plan B if you need a plan B and following people like Pippa to see how so many of us navigate the world like this because we absolutely recognize that it's not perfect, that there are barriers and challenges, but that I think that access fails and joy of exploring places can coexist. A bad moment on a day trip doesn't have to mean an entirely bad day. And what I would say is, give yourself some grace. Don't be so hard on yourself if things do go wrong. And that's perhaps what I would like to have known earlier. Because you can still have a good experience.
Yeah. That's so true. And that's such a good one about having like a bad moment doesn't make for a bad day. That's so true. That's something that I wish I could go back and tell my younger self. I wish I had your wisdom at a younger age as well. Like we learn so much from each other, all of us.
Absolutely, the power of community, and that's why we're here answering these questions, and that's why we've started this series because we want to help other disabled people out there to feel more confident, to feel more connection, and to feel supported by these conversations. So we hope that you've found this chat useful. Remember to send us in your questions for the next episode. What have you always wanted to know about access, inclusion, or navigating the world as a disabled person? Let us know in the comments or send us a message. And this has been Ask Away, brought to you by AccessAble, where lived experience leads the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Pippa.
Thank you for having me.